Throughout history, humans have always sought ways to shape their environment not just to survive, but to thrive. In the Middle Ages, when technology was limited and resources scarce, builders and craftsmen relied on ingenious techniques renewable materials and required communal labor rather than industrial machinery. To humble cottages, these forgotten methods reveal a world where every stone, beam, and joint carried both function and meaning. What secrets did medieval builders know that we have since overlooked? Let us journey back to uncover the lost techniques that once defined strength, beauty, and survival in a harsh and uncertain world. 1. Stone masonry, the backbone of medieval construction. Medieval builders possessed a mastery of stone that remains astonishing even today. Castles, cathedrals, and fortresses were not simply erected. They were crafted with precision and vision. Stonemasons understood how to read the natural lines within the rock, cutting and shaping it so that every block interlocked seamlessly. Without modern machinery, they used hand tools like chisels, mallets, and wedges, relying on physical strength and deep knowledge of material properties. The strength of their constructions lay not only in the stones themselves, but in the mortar that bound them. A mix of lime, water, and aggregates created a material that hardened over time, becoming nearly as solid as the stones it held together. This technique allowed structures such as Notre Dame in Paris or Durham Cathedral in England to endure for centuries, surviving wars, weather, and even fire. What makes medieval stone masonry remarkable is not only its durability but also its artistry. Cathedrals were adorned with intricate carvings, gargoyles, and symbolic figures that transformed stone into storytelling. Every surface served both a functional and a spiritual purpose, embodying the medieval belief that construction itself was an act of devotion. Secrets written in stone and timber. Imagine walking through the ruins of a medieval castle. The stone walls, though scarred by centuries of wind and war, still stand with a kind of silent defiance. You run your hand across the cool surface of the stone, and you can almost feel the echo of forgotten hands. Builders, masons, carpenters who once poured their sweat and skill into these structures. The question strikes, how did they build something so enduring, so clever, without the machines, cranes, and modern tools we take for granted today? The medieval world was one of paradox. On the surface, it seemed a time of hardship, wars, plagues, and uncertainty. Yet beneath that, it was an age of astonishing ingenuity. Builders of the Middle Ages worked with limited resources, yet they developed techniques so effective that many of their creations have survived for nearly 1,000 years. From the cooling designs of stone keeps to timber frameworks that seemed to breathe with the air, their methods were not only functional but often beautifully elegant. What makes these techniques even more fascinating is that many have been forgotten or dismissed in our age of technology. And yet, in a world increasingly concerned with sustainability, energy efficiency, and natural living, we find ourselves turning back to these old solutions. Medieval builders, without ever knowing it, were already practicing eco-conscious construction using local materials, passive cooling methods, and ingenious structural designs that worked with nature rather than against it. This journey will not just explore the stones and beams of medieval architecture, it will uncover the hidden wisdom in their craft. Each chapter reveals a building method, not as a dusty piece of history, but as a living idea that still has the power to inspire modern builders, architects, and dreamers. 3. Stone masonry, the eternal craft. Stone was the backbone of medieval construction. While timber was fast and flexible, stone was eternal. Cathedrals, castles, bridges, and fortifications all relied on stone to embody permanence, grandeur, and divine strength. The skills of masons were highly respected, and their knowledge was closely guarded, passed down through guilds. Unlike wood, stone demanded patience, mathematical precision, and incredible teamwork. To transform raw rock into majestic walls, builders combined intuition with geometry, artistry with raw muscle. Masons worked with limestone, sandstone, granite, and marble, each chosen for its availability and unique qualities. Limestone, soft when quarried yet hardening over time, was favored for intricate carvings and sculptures. Granite, heavy and durable, was reserved for foundations or monumental structures. Extracting stone was itself a feat. Workers in quarries used iron picks, wooden wedges, and water expansion techniques, soaking inserted wedges until the rock split naturally. Once extracted, blocks were transported by oxen carts, sledges, or floated along rivers to construction sites. At the building site, masons shaped blocks with chisels and hammers, ensuring precise fits. Mortar, often lime-based, was applied not only to bind stones but to absorb slight irregularities. The technique of ashlar masonry, where stones were cut into uniform blocks, allowed builders to construct smooth, strong walls. In contrast, rubble masonry, using irregular stones, was faster but required more mortar. Both techniques coexisted, often within the same structure, depending on the desired balance between cost, speed, and prestige. What makes medieval stone masonry fascinating is not only the technical skill but the artistic ambition. Cathedrals soared higher each century, each new generation daring to test the limits of gravity and stone. Decorative carvings, grotesque gargoyles, and elaborate tracery transformed solid walls into canvases of faith and imagination. Every block, every column, every arch carried both structural weight and symbolic meaning. In many ways, the stonemason was not just a craftsman but also a silent storyteller, leaving behind narratives carved in stone that still whisper to us today. 4. Timber framing, the living skeleton of medieval life. If stone gave medieval buildings their permanence, timber gave them their soul. Wood was everywhere, in the beams that held roofs aloft, in the scaffolding that supported the rise of cathedrals, in the doors, bridges, and even in entire houses that still stand today in small European towns. Unlike stone, which seemed eternal and unyielding, wood was flexible, responsive, and alive. To work with timber required not just strength, but an intimate understanding of nature itself. The medieval carpenter's craft was far more complex than simply cutting logs into planks. Every piece of timber was selected with care. Oak, for example, was prized for its strength and resistance to decay, making it perfect for foundations and framing. Fir and pine, lighter and easier to work, were often used for roofing or temporary scaffolding. Carpenters read the grain of the wood, studied its age rings, and considered how it had grown, because even the direction in which a tree leaned in the forest affected the durability of the beams it produced. The most impressive achievement of medieval carpentry was the timber frame house, a technique that combined wooden beams into sturdy skeletons joined together by wooden pegs rather than nails. Mortise and tenon joints, where one beam was carved to fit snugly into a slot in another, created interlocking frameworks that could stand for centuries. Many medieval towns across Europe, from York in England to Rothenburg in Germany, still display these half-timbered houses, their crooked beams a living memory of centuries past. Timber also shaped the defensive structures of the age. Palisades, rows of sharpened logs, protected early fortifications before stone walls became common. Wooden hoardings, temporary galleries built along the tops of castle walls, allowed defenders to rain arrows or stones on attackers while remaining protected themselves. Even when castles were clad in stone, wood provided the flexibility and adaptability that stone alone could never achieve. To the medieval carpenter, every beam had a purpose, and every joint was a puzzle piece in a larger whole. Their work carried not only practical necessity but also artistry. Carved doorways, decorated roof beams, and intricate wooden screens inside churches remind us that medieval woodworking was as much about beauty as it was about survival. In this way, timber became the living skeleton of medieval life, shaping homes, protecting cities, and supporting the rise of monumental stone structures. And though wood may burn and decay, the ingenuity of medieval carpenters ensured that their designs lived on, influencing building traditions for centuries. Timber also shaped the defensive structures of the age. Palisades, rows of sharpened logs, protected early fortifications before stone walls became common. Wooden hoardings, temporary galleries built along the tops of castle walls, allowed defenders to rain arrows or stones on attackers while remaining protected themselves. Even when castles were clad in stone, wood provided the flexibility and adaptability that stone alone could never achieve. To the medieval carpenter, every beam had a purpose, and every joint was a puzzle piece in a larger whole. Their work carried not only practical necessity but also artistry. Carved doorways, decorated roof beams, and intricate wooden screens inside churches remind us that medieval woodworking was as much about beauty as it was about survival. In this way, timber became the living skeleton of medieval life, shaping homes, protecting cities, and supporting the rise of monumental stone structures. And though wood may burn and decay, the ingenuity of medieval carpenters ensured that their designs lived on, influencing building traditions for centuries. Decorative carving flourished alongside structural stonework. Gargoyles, tracery, and sculpted capitals were not merely artistic expressions but also carried symbolic and functional meanings. Gargoyles, for instance, acted as water spouts to protect walls from erosion, while also reminding churchgoers of sin and damnation. The forgotten genius of medieval stonework lies not only in aesthetics but in endurance. Structures such as Notre Dame de Paris, Canterbury Cathedral, and countless Romanesque monasteries demonstrate that, when stone was placed with care and skill, it could withstand centuries of weather, war, and fire. 6. Carpentry and timber construction. While stone was the face of permanence, timber was the backbone of everyday medieval life. Houses, barns, mills, and even parts of castles relied on wood for structure. Medieval carpenters developed intricate joinery techniques that required no nails, instead using mortise and tenon joints, wooden pegs, and dovetails to lock beams together. Timber framing allowed for flexible and efficient construction. Whole communities could raise a building within days, using collective labor and shared knowledge. Roofs, especially, showcased remarkable design. Trusses were engineered to span wide halls without internal supports, creating the great vaulted ceilings of medieval guild halls and churches. Builders understood the properties of different woods. Oak was favored for strength, elm resisted rot when submerged in water, and chestnut offered natural resistance to insects. These insights allowed carpenters to adapt structures to local climates and needs. Medieval carpentry also extended to defensive architecture. Wooden palisades, hoardings, temporary defensive walkways attached to castle walls, and siege engines such as trebuchets were feats of timber engineering. Each construction combined knowledge of balance, force, and resilience that rivaled stone masonry in complexity. Though many wooden structures have not survived due to fire and decay, archaeological evidence and preserved timber-framed houses in Europe revealed the extraordinary skill that medieval carpenters brought to their craft. 7. Roofing and insulation techniques. A building, no matter how strong its stone walls or sturdy its timber frame, could not protect its inhabitants without a reliable roof. In the medieval world, roofing was both an art and a science, adapted to local resources and environmental challenges. Thatched roofs, made from straw or reeds, were among the most common coverings for rural homes. When layered thickly and angled steeply, thatch provided excellent insulation and water resistance. However, it required constant upkeep, as pests and fire posed significant threats. Despite this, entire villages relied on thatching, and skilled thatchers were highly valued members of their communities. In wealthier towns and cities, wooden shingles or clay tiles became preferred alternatives. Wooden shingles offered a lighter option, while tiles provided durability and resistance to fire. The red-tiled roofs that still characterize many European cities today are a direct inheritance from these medieval techniques. Slate, where available, was another prized material, able to withstand centuries with minimal repair. Beyond roofing materials, medieval builders also experimented with insulation. Walls of wattle and daub, stuffed with straw or moss, trapped warmth in winter and kept homes cool in summer. In castles and monasteries, tapestries served as both decoration and insulation, covering cold stone walls with layers of fabric that reduced drafts. Even floor coverings, rushes, straw mats, or animal skins added layers of protection against damp and cold. What is striking is how sustainable these methods were. They relied entirely on natural, renewable materials and required communal labor rather than industrial machinery. Yet they created homes that were warm enough for harsh winters and cool enough for summer heat, a lesson that modern eco-builders are only beginning to relearn. 8. Metalworking in construction. While stone and timber formed the backbone of medieval architecture, metal was the hidden force that held everything together. Without iron, lead, and bronze, many of the grand structures of the Middle Ages would never have stood the test of time. Iron was perhaps the most versatile. Blacksmiths forged nails, hinges, and brackets that kept wooden beams secure and doors functional. Iron clamps were driven into stone blocks to lock them in place, making towering cathedrals and castles possible. Wrought iron grills protected windows, while decorative ironwork adorned gates, balconies, and railings, blending strength with artistry. Lead played a quieter but equally critical role. It was the material of choice for waterproofing and roofing in grand buildings. Sheets of lead covered cathedral roofs, providing durability against centuries of rain. Even more importantly, lead piping formed the arteries of medieval water systems, carrying fresh water into monasteries, palaces, and cities.